This sermon is a bit of a work in progress. It's incomplete, as so many innocent lives that have been taken before their time. This week, a gunman opened fire at Oregon's Umpqua Community College, singling students out for their religion. As Jews, we know what it means to be singled out for our religion. He took 9 lives along with his own. 30-year-old Chris Mintz took 3 bullets trying to bar the door with his own body. When thrust to the floor, he appealed to empathy, noting that it was actually his son's birthday. And mercilessly, the gunman shot him 2 more times. Although he may never walk again, Chris Mintz appears to be in stable condition. And many people are trying to use his name as someone to honor and appreciate as a real hero, rather than mention the name of the gunman himself, and I'll not be mentioning his name in this sermon. I hate to say it, but events like what happened in Oregon happen every day. In a shocking piece published just yesterday, the Washington Post reports that in the last 274 days of this year, there have been over 294 mass shootings, as the FBI defines them. Meanwhile, CNN revealed yesterday that the years between 2004 and 2013, that's most of my son Ezra's life, the United States lost over 316,000 people to gun violence right here on the home front, as opposed to 36 people lost in the United States to terrorism. On Yom Kippur, I noted that in the years since Kennedy was assassinated, more Americans have been killed by guns than by all of the wars that the United States ever fought combined. That's including the Civil War, when we lost over 600,000 soldiers. To put things into perspective, I want to run a little comparison between the United States and Israel. Because Israel has such a vital need for self-defense, a recent study found that there are 7 firearms per 100 people in Israel. That understandably puts Israel among the top countries in the world for firearm possession, slightly above the United Kingdom, but with about half as many firearms as Australia. Canada has 31 firearms per 100 people. Do you know how many firearms we have per 100 people in the United States? 88, something like that. It is close to 100. It's probably not what the Founding Fathers had in mind when they spoke about the right for people to bear arms. The more firearms there are, the more firearm homicides there are. While we recognize that the Second Amendment gives us a right to bear arms in the United States, we have yet to impose legislation that would adequately delineate how that right would apply in this generation. Most Americans support a First Amendment right to free speech, but recognize that there are constraints on that right. We don't have the same kind of restraints on gun control. Actually, in 1994, Congress passed a 10-year federal assault weapons ban, which was signed by President Bill Clinton, but unfortunately Congress let it expire in 2004 under President George Bush, and now your average American has access to the same military-grade weapons that anyone in the Army or the Air Force would have access to, sometimes more so. Visibly frustrated by the inability of Congress to pass legislation to prevent these tragedies from repeating themselves, President Obama spoke with marked emotion and sincerity this week. He said, "We are the only advanced country on earth that sees these kinds of mass shootings every few months," adding, "This is a political choice that we make to allow this to happen. We collectively are answerable to those families who lose their loved ones." Tomorrow night, we observe Simchat Torah. We celebrate the fact that our Torah has taught us values to live by. Just last week on Yom Kippur, I chanted, "Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa," you shall not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor, from Leviticus 19:16. We cannot stand idly by while gun violence takes the lives of 30 Americans every single day. Judaism has always recognized a right to self-defense. The Babylonian Talmud speaks of a right and even a responsibility to kill a rodef, a pursuer, someone who is after either your life or another human being's life. And it goes so far as to apply the rodef to anyone who is even breaking and entering a house, because there would be an assumption that they might resort to murder in order to defend themselves. Moses Maimonides applies the same concept of self-defense as a criteria for what could be a just war in some circumstances. And while some Jews admirably are devout pacifists who would oppose war or violence under any circumstances, the majority of us recognize, as did Moses Maimonides, that there were times when violence is acceptable, if not obligatory. But that being said, there's a difference between self-defense and overkill. The rabbis taught that he who takes one life, it is as though he has destroyed the whole world, from Mishnah Sanhedrin 4:5. And Rabbi Joel Mosbacher of Congregation Beit Chavarim Shir Shalom in Mahwah, New Jersey, describes a time when his whole world was destroyed. He writes, 14 years ago, my father was murdered at his place of business, killed by a man with a firearm. A world ended that day. And yet the murder of my father, Lester Mosbacher, didn't make it onto CNN. Neither Fox nor MSNBC broke into their regularly scheduled programming to cover the end of a world. In fact, most of the names of the tens of thousands of people whose lives are ended with a gun in this country each year are anonymous to us, unless we are the husband, the wife, the child, the grandchild, or the friend. Then, of course, there's the argument that the issue is not really access to weapons so much as it is an issue of mental health. You look into the eyes of some of the gunmen that we've had the misfortune to see over the last several years, and we can see sometimes that they are people that are facing all kinds of extraordinary psychological challenges, and sometimes not so much. I recently read a report entitled Grounded in Faith, Resources on Mental Health and Gun Violence, put out by the American Association of People with Disabilities in conjunction with an interfaith disability advocacy coalition, including the Jewish Federations of North America and the Union for Reform Judaism, among others. And this is what they had to say on correlations or lack thereof between violence and mental illness. They said, according to the MacArthur Study of Mental Disorder and Violence, the most rigorous scientific study conducted to date by the country's leading experts on mental illness and violence, the contribution to violence made by persons with mental illness is no larger than the contribution made by persons who do not have a mental illness, and with other demographic and socioeconomic factors contributing much more than mental illness. The subgroup most at risk for committing violent acts is actually young and single working-class white males. Within behavioral health broadly, active substance use does contribute to violence. But within mental health, schizophrenia, the condition most alluded to by people who characterize the mentally ill as violent, contributes least to violence among the major illnesses. Yes, we have an issue providing proper mental health care to those who need it most. But if we want to curtail thousands of fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters needlessly being murdered in America, the first step has got to be a universal background check, supported by, some say, 90% of America. It has support by some in the Republican Party, by some in the Democratic Party. There are many gun owners who support a universal background check, and yet Congress has yet to provide that. Secondly, we need to limit the kinds of weapons to which people have access. There already are some limits. You can't have a bazooka, but there ought to be more limits. No civilian needs more than a simple pistol. And arguably, we'd all be better off without even that. When faced with gun violence on a daily basis, we have to resist the numbing sensation that our president has been talking about. We have to remind ourselves that the Torah teaches us that every human being was created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Surely we can't save everyone, but our tradition tells us that he who saves one life is as though he has saved the whole world. As Rabbi David Saperstein, the former director of the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism, once put it, our gun-flooded, violence-prone society has turned weapons into idols. The prophet Isaiah spoke of a time when they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And the Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai added, he took it one step further. He said, don't stop after beating the swords into plowshares. Don't stop. Go on beating and make musical instruments out of them. Whomever wants to make war again will have to turn them into plowshares first. Rabbi Lauren Grabel Herman notes the fatigue that so many of us are feeling 3 years after Sandy Hook, when we still don't have as much to show for ourselves as we might wish. She calls to mind the words of the civil rights activist Abraham Joshua Heschel, who taught us not to rest even when we feel so powerless and incompetent. He said, daily we should take account and ask, what have I done today to alleviate the anguish, to mitigate the evil, to prevent humiliation? I wish that I could provide a simple answer to resolve these very complicated issues. But I can say that even though I don't have a simple answer today, these are challenges that are not insurmountable. And I have faith in humanity to pull together to set the trajectory back on track for the sake of the innocent, for the overriding value of human life. Shabbat Shalom.